And Dr. Bob, what about sports? What about sports? Why is it okay for a man to identify as a woman and jump in the swimming pool and beat all the girls who have been training?
And by the way, that man still has his dick. Okay? So it seems to me, if you're going to say you identify as a woman and you want to play in a women's team, you can't have a dick.
Mainstream media gives you the impression that there is nothing good about America. In direct contrast to that, my podcasts will prove by examples that America has always been and still is the land of opportunity for everyone.
Hello, and welcome to another episode in the series Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. My guest today is Marc Little. A long time ago, people knew Marc Little as the son of a pro football player, Floyd Little, a halfback for the Denver Broncos, and a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But that's not the case today. Today, Marc Little is known for his own accomplishments, of which, as you'll see, there are many. He is intelligent, articulate, successful, and a very busy man. He is an ordained pastor, a practicing attorney, a political commentator, an author, and a board member on more than 10 different civic, educational, and philanthropic organizations. He is the founder and director of Cure America Action, a nonprofit corporation based in Washington, D.C., which advocates for conservative principles based on Christianity, capitalism, and the Constitution. And on top of that, he frequently gets to speak his mind on cable, radio, and in print. On cable, he appears on Fox, CNN, on One American News and The Blaze. On radio, he's been featured on KABC, KKLA, Salem Communications, and Public Radio International. And his commentary has appeared in print in the LA Times, the Washington Times, the Wall Street Journal, and a host of others. I don't know how Marc has enough time to eat or sleep, given the many organizations that he's involved with and his many media appearances, but he's found time to be here with us tonight. Marc has been standing by patiently in his office, waiting for me to hand him the microphone. So let's go. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Dr. Bob, I can't tell you what an honor it is to be with you. Thank you for all that you do in the conservative movement and beyond, in your own philanthropy. Without people like you, people like me would not exist on the scale that we do.
Well,
so I thank you, and I'm glad to be with you.
Thank you, Marc. But when I think about you, I think about a man who takes on challenges and works to overcome them. The challenges of government overreach, the challenges by the woke and the leftists, the challenges by the so-called trans community and others. So, Marc, let's start off by telling us about the most serious challenge that you faced 30 years ago. Getting shot and losing your leg. Compared to that very unwelcome challenge, all of the others seem minor.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bob. That on July 31st, 1987, 4 days after my birthday, actually, I didn't know, but an encounter would shape the rest of my life. And I like to tell this story because it is beyond a story of tragedy to triumph, but it's a story that tells people, if he can do it, maybe I can too. I was at USC, I had graduated undergraduate, and I was on my way to do something, God knows what. But I was still living in off-campus housing at USC. And I'm from Connecticut, West Haven, Connecticut. And I had been at USC for 4 years. And strangely, I just didn't know that the University of Southern California was in the middle of gangland in Los Angeles. I just didn't know. And so after I graduated, I stayed in off-campus housing for a time. Back then, Dr. Bob, I used to live off of peanut butter and jelly. So So I went across the street to get myself a loaf of bread. And I came back, and as I was approaching my off-campus apartment door, which faced the street, I heard a voice cry out. He said, "Can you come help me? Can you help me?" And I, I'm a little boy from Connecticut. Sure. Help you with what? And as I approached him to see how I could help him, how I could be of service, he turned and he pointed a 12-gauge shotgun right in the middle of my forehead. And he said, "Fix this." He said, "Give me $100, at least $100. And then at that time, my girlfriend, now my wife, Tigra, thank God, she fled as I raised my arms in the air. And Dr. Bob, people who have experienced a traumatic situation like that, you get tunnel vision and time stops. It stands still. It's the most amazing physiological thing that happens. And I heard him mouth those words, $100, at least $100, in slow motion. And all I could think of, Dr. Bob, was that in just a matter of seconds, my head would be on the sidewalk behind me. And by the grace of God, he turned that 12-gauge shotgun around and hit me with the butt end of it. He didn't hit me hard enough, actually, to make me fall, but I threw myself to the ground, prayerfully hoping that it would end, whatever this was. I had never experienced anything like this, any encounter of violence at all. And I fell to the ground. And standing right over me with that 12-gauge shotgun, he pumped that rifle, that shotgun rather, and he pulled the trigger. And it was aimed at my head. But the force of that weapon, that gun moved just ever so slightly. And it hit me in the main artery of my right leg. And after I it's just amazing. When your body experiences trauma like that, you don't feel it, but you know something has happened. It's very bizarre how the body protects you. The adrenaline kicks in. And I saw him flee. He got into the car where there was someone behind the wheel, and they sped off. And I could hear in the distance my girlfriend knocking on doors, screaming for help. And if you know USC, right across the street from McClintock and Jefferson, it was a fire station before Rick Caruso developed that whole piece of land. There was a fire station. And within moments, they came, Dr. Bob. And by the time they took me to the closest hospital, which was not King, which was the trauma center, they got me to California Med. I got there with 1 unit of blood left. And my life was hanging in the balance. And so I struggled through a very critical time in my life, through ICU and in and out of 7 surgeries, trying to save my life. And they did. They saved my life. They told my mother, though, if she didn't get in from Connecticut overnight, because my head became hydrocephalic, and they said if he makes it, he'll be brain dead and blind. And so my mother rushed in, and thank God, I didn't die, but they did amputate my leg. A couple months after that, I have the highest level of amputation you can have of a leg. It's called a hip disarticulation, pulled right out of the socket. And so I'm blessed to be able to walk around with a prosthesis and a cane, and I try to make it as cool as possible. But I'm thankful to have life, and that girl that saw me get shot is now my wife. And I'm blessed to have her in my life. From tragedy to triumph. That's my story. It was pivotal. And from that moment, Dr. Bob, I learned that tomorrow is just not promised. And we've got to do something with every day, because I can leave this interview and I can go and get in my car, and it could be my last time doing an interview. I'm aware of that. And so that's why I tell people, you gotta do good today, because tomorrow is not promised.
Well, I had not quite the same experience, but a near death, having contracted a very rare kind of cancer, usually deadly. Obviously, I recovered fully. But those kinds of experiences make you understand that these common problems in life are not what you shouldn't get upset about those problems. Every time something happens to me, I turn to my wife and I say, well, it's not cancer. It's not cancer. And you thank every day I wake up and every day I wake up and I thank God, turn to the heavens or turn outside, look at the lawn and say, thank God for another day on earth, because it is not, it's not promised that you'll be here the next day. And you've had that experience, but senseless violence. It's senseless violence. He didn't even give you a chance to take out $100. You probably didn't have $100, but he just wanted to kill you. He just wanted to kill you.
He was an 18-year-old black gang member who had to do a gang initiation. He had to kill somebody.
Yeah.
And he tried to kill somebody the night before. And they were witnesses at my trial. He had to kill somebody. And he didn't succeed. But Dr. Bob, you know, as I look back over it and you tell your story as a cancer survivor, and I can tell my story as a survivor of violence. But you know what it did to both of us? It gave us the moxie to not fear anything. We looked death in the eye. And so when you and I speak to the culture about what's wrong, and we're living in a culture where God knows who's going to come after you for speaking the truth. I've already died once. I'm not afraid of a mob. I'm not afraid of a culture that wants to take God and put him in the drawer. I'm not afraid of the gay Gestapo. I'm just going to speak the truth without hating anybody, but I'm going to tell the truth because they don't scare me. And that's the difference between people like you and me.
That's right.
And other people who are walking around
don't fear.
Afraid.
Don't fear. Now, after that incident, I'm quite sure that you have a rather strong opinion about both the no bail policies in certain counties and cities, and about the proposed legislation in California giving judges the right to consider a criminal's race and skin color when making decisions about sentencing. Now, a leftist or a liberal might think that it's a good idea to take race and skin color into account because it would likely result in lighter sentences for supposedly oppressed people who are convicted of crimes. So first, what do you think about eliminating bail for certain offenses?
Well, it's folly. It's wrong. It's unconstitutional. And it is at the core of critical theory, which, of course, is where we get identity politics, and it's at the core of critical race theory. And as you just alluded to, it is at the core of intersectionality, which is a part of critical race theory, which is to divide us in classes. And so in that theory, reverse discrimination is exactly what they intend to do. And I don't know who in their right mind would ever believe that the answer to discrimination is reverse discrimination. Right. It simply makes no sense.
So what about the proposal, to let judges decide? It's the same kind of story. Same kind of story. Why? Yeah, I guess they're trying to balance. There are too many black juveniles in jail. So the cure to that is to not send them to jail, right? That's right. Why are they in jail in the first place? Probably for committing a crime against other black people in the neighborhood. Most of them are not black on white crime. It's black on black. So by letting these people out of jail early or no jail means that you're giving them the right and the opportunity to do more harm to black people. That's right. It's just a terrible situation.
I'll tell you, Dr. Bob, it reminds me of a piece of legislation that passed last year. And I'll get to AB 872 in a moment. But just last year, you might recall, they gave judges the discretion to require a sex offender, a pedophile, to register, to be on the sex registry. Yeah. And they said the judge has the discretion if there is 10 years between the pedophile and the minor, whether or not to force them to register on the sex offenders registry. This is lunacy. So AB 872, and by the way, it doesn't say the judge may have discretion. It says the judge shall apply race in sentencing. It is what they call equity.
Yeah.
It is fixing what they perceive to be an imbalance or injustice without actually understanding that the criminal justice system has failed. I don't care what color they are. It is no longer a rehabilitation system. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so instead of dealing with the issue of rehabilitation, because people who are in jail are in there for the most part, I believe it's a very high percentage, 98% or so, have actually done the crime and were convicted by a jury of their peers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So instead of looking at how to rehabilitate these folks who commit crimes, they're just interested in bringing about their version of equity.
Right?
Which is to impose what they believe the society should look like.
Right.
And at the expense of non-Black, non-Hispanic people. In other words, punish the white man.
Yes.
And let's make sure that Black boys and Hispanic boys don't pay the price of their behavior.
That's so we can have an equal number of everybody in jail. Yeah.
It makes no sense at all, because as a survivor of violent crime, it completely ignores the impact of their criminal behavior on, I don't like to call myself a victim, but that's a common term, on the quote unquote victims of their behavior. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So families who have lost loved ones, families who have been harmed by their behavior, and like you said, within the Black community, it's Black on Black crime. Within the white community, it's white on white, et cetera, all down the line. Forget about what has happened in that community and the brokenness that their behavior caused. All we're interested in is emptying out the jail.
Yeah.
That's all they're interested in. And by the way, Joe Biden and Black leaders with the crime bill of 1994, that's what they did. They locked up Black boys and girls. Now they're trying to reverse their history. It is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. They should make up their minds what they want to do. It is unclear. But what I do know is that justice must be colorblind. It must be. If justice is not colorblind, then we have a bigger problem than we know.
No,
if we can
totally
just go around
locking
up people or not locking up people because of their race, our society will collapse.
Now, in the past few years, Mark, the media has been obsessed with stories, always positive stories, about gays, lesbians, transgenders, and the rest of the LBGTQXYZ crowd. Altogether, these letters represent a tiny fraction of America's population and even the world's population. But yet they are treated as if they are a majority. The media and the current administration has made transgenderism to appear as not only acceptable behavior, but that it should be treated as normal as apple pie and should be admired. Things are seriously out of whack. Just a few weeks ago, President Biden held a major event at the White House to celebrate Pride Month. We celebrate Mother's Day, Father's Day, Veterans Day, President's Day, Martin Luther King Day, one day. But we now have an entire month to celebrate abnormal sexual behavior. Why is this happening, Mark? What's behind this?
Thank you for that question. It's a very serious issue. They've attempted to make it the civil rights issue of our time, and it is not. I tell you, I look at it from a spiritual perspective and from a political perspective. Spiritually speaking, Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, it says that there will come a time where everything that is right will be called wrong. And wrong will be called right. What is bitter will be taken for sweet, and sweet for bitter.
That's in the Bible. That's in the Bible.
Isaiah 5:20. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. Yeah, and it goes down. There's several verses. And yet that's exactly right. It was obviously the prophet Isaiah was talking about our time and some of the times before ours. It is absolutely what we're watching. But here's the broader point, spiritually speaking. There is an attack on God's design for the family. The Marxist ideology / communism, which is where they want to lead us. You can't have a strong family. You can't have a strong nuclear family. You can't have strong men. And so in part, it's a part of the agenda to destroy God's design for the family. When I speak, I often talk about the fence that God built to protect the family. And that fence is called marriage. We saw in 2015 that they destroyed the fence that was built around the family. Now, they're going after the next generation by making sure that the generation that is being indoctrinated now with LGBTQ ideology and gender fluidity and all that nonsense, where gender no longer matches the sex that you were born with, all of that intends to not only impact the next generation, where there'll be less procreation than there is today. And by the way, in the Black community, we've already we don't have the replacement rate any longer. So the Black race is on its way to extinction because we're not producing enough children because we're aborting them. So that's what's happening, generally speaking. But the Black community is far ahead of everybody else. We are on the track to extinction as an ethnicity in our country.
I did not realize that.
Yes. And so the family, the nuclear family is under attack because they're trying to destroy the next generation. And to the extent that the next generation survives, it will be so warped with immorality that it will be unrecognizable. And so that's the spiritual aspect of it.
In this generation, from what I can read and talk to my son and their friends, they're not getting married. They're not getting married.
Attack on the family.
Yeah.
And so then when you look at it from a political standpoint, it's very much out of the ideology that is anti-God, anti-man, anti-family. And so when you have little Black boys being adopted by all these celebrities and they put little skirts on them and put them in little girls' pumps and all that, Dr. Bob, you and I know that there is such a thing as good and evil. And so we're talking about evil. The Bible tells us, and it's not me, it's the Bible, the Torah and the Christian Bible. We talk about what sin is and what is an aberration, what is sin. And so I don't get to choose what sins can be acceptable and what sins cannot be. And so what we're looking at, when I preach, Dr. Bob, I call this the normalcy of darkness.
The normalization. Right.
Yeah. And so if we can just get everybody thinking that it's okay to be a pedophile, that it's okay to change your gender and to surgically remove your penis and your breasts, and then get the government to pay for it, and then you be damned if you think that you've got a thought against it. No. That is trying to get us to accept immorality and aberration.
That's exactly
I
right.
have a lot of friends, Dr. Bob, who are gay. I have a lot of friends who are gay. And I separate their lifestyle from the person that I love.
That's correct. And we don't say, we say it's okay, but we don't say it's normal. Okay? It's not normal. I don't care. Yes, and I'm not sure it's a choice. Probably people are born one way or another with inclinations to be gay or not gay. It's not a choice. But, they shouldn't be penalized, but we shouldn't think of it as it's okay, that it's normal. and that you should urge people to do it. That's what's happening now. They're not only saying you should accept it, but you have to say it's normal and it's fine. Well, it's not fine. Transgenderism is not fine.
And Dr. Bob, it would be something that we could tolerate, which I wouldn't be a proponent of. I wouldn't promote that. But it would be something that could be tolerable if they weren't trying to force the ideology and what it looks like in many instances of mental illness on our children, on our little girls in their bathrooms.
And telling the kids in grade school that if you feel okay, tell us about it, but don't tell your parents, we'll protect you. It's becoming trendy in school to say that you're thinking about changing your sex. Can you imagine that? That's
Dr.
where we
Bob,
are.
what about sports? Why is it okay for a man to identify as a woman and jump in the swimming pool and beat all the girls who have been training?
And by the way, that man still has his dick. Okay? So it seems to me, if you're going to say you identify as a woman and you want to play in a women's team, you can't have a dick. Okay, you have to be serious about I'm not a man anymore. Even then, I'm still against it because men are born and through their through puberty, they have different muscle structure. It's unfair to women's sports, totally unfair. But at the very least, okay, you want to say you're a woman? Well, you better not have a dick. Okay, right?
Look, it's XX and it's XY.
Right.
Even if you surgically remove your penis, you still have a XX or XY.
Right.
And that's just the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And because of those chromosomes, men have certain advantages over women. I don't care what hormones you're taking that allow you to grow hair in a breast. We're wiping out what strides that women have made.
And I can't believe that the sports associations are approving this. I can't believe it.
It really is a sad commentary.
And the women, there's a way to fight back. And what worries me is the conservatives don't know how to fight back. They just don't know how to fight back. And
we're going to talk about that. But Dr. Bob, I don't know if you heard this, but Africa, one of the leaders of sub-Saharan Africa, I'm not sure it was South Africa or not, but they were being interviewed. And they said, Russia and China are helping us get arms to defend ourselves. But the United States is trying to make us accept their transgender ideology.
Right. Our embassies, I believe, in some countries are flying the gay pride flag. Now, we have to become more assertive. And for example, if I had a daughter, or if I was involved in women's sports, I would tell them, if a man shows up, I don't care, he claims he's feeling like a woman, you just don't compete. Don't compete. End the competition. He can swim alone in the pool. Don't compete, because by competing, you're going along with it. You can't go along with it.
And there's no competition. It's an oxymoron. That's why I agree with you. If that happens, everybody should jump out of the pool.
Out. Everybody out.
Period.
Right. And that would change.
Whatever it is, weightlifting, swimming, whatever it is not right. It's like, a woman that what's going to happen next? NFL, Major League Baseball, everything is up for grabs.
No, but you're not going to have transgender women competing in men's sports. That you're not going to have, right? It's transgender men competing in women's sports because they can't win in the men's sports.
Yeah, it is that same reverse discrimination that we talked about a moment ago. In whatever form that it comes in, we must reject it. And to your point, the majority of us who know it's wrong, we need to be making more noise than we are. And that's a part of the problem.
We need civil disobedience, okay? The parents of all those girls at a swim meet should block the doors and not let the swim meet happen. Not let it happen. We have to be willing, like the left, to participate in civil disobedience.
And then run the risk, which for me is a welcome risk, of Merrick Garland calling you a domestic terrorist. That's when you know you're winning.
That's it. Right. There's been a lot of press lately, especially in California, where various cities and even the state are considering reparations for blacks living in America. The objective, they claim, is to give money to blacks because of the damage that was done to their ancestors when slavery was legal in our country. Now, the strange thing is California never allowed slaves at any time in its history. Yet it wants to take billions of dollars from people who never owned slaves and give it to people who never were slaves. What do you think, Mark?
Well, there are more arguments against it than there are for it. I can tell you that much. I've talked about this quite a bit. First of all, we've got to start with 40 Acres and a Mule. Andrew Johnson, the Democrat president that came right after Abraham Lincoln, said, no, we're not going to follow through with that special order. And at that time, reparations were appropriate, as we have done with Japanese who were in internment camps, as we did with black men who were experimented on in the Tuskegee Institute experiment, as we did with black men in jail who were experimented on for Agent Orange.
Right.
So there's a history of paying reparations. And of course, I don't need to go into how we have paid reparations to other nations. So I don't have a problem with the idea of reparations when there's a harm. I do have a problem when we're talking about reparations for descendants of African slaves. Here's why. First of all, what do you do with the descendants of all the white men who died in the Civil War fighting for the freedom of the slaves? What do you do? What do you do? What do their descendants do? How do they opt out? Number one. Number two, what do we do with the blacks who own slaves out of Louisiana, as an example? Very prominent black family owned slaves. What do we do about that? Number three, there's something called the five tribes. There were Indian tribes that owned white and black slaves. All right. What do we do with the fact that it was the Southern Democrats who were the slave owners and who fought to maintain the institution? What do we do with the Democrat Party who is behind it? If there's going to be a check written, maybe it should be written by the DNC.
Very good point. And we go into this in another question later. Go ahead. Yeah. Great.
Just a little tongue in cheek there. Great. Obviously, those things are impossible to do. But
the Democrats should pay. If you're a Democrat, if there's going to be reparations, Jesus, my ancestors were in Russia at the time. Okay, I'm just a second generation American. Why should I pay? I had nothing to do with it.
Here's the answer, Dr. Bob, and this is what's saddening to me. See, we've created a nanny state where people want a handout, whether it's Section 8, whether it's welfare. All of that stuff, AFDC, and there's some good that comes out of the safety net, but it's become a lifestyle.
It's become a hammock.
Yeah, and so we can't. What we should be doing, if we're going to do anything at all, is making sure that educational freedom is available, because they're passing kids through school now who can't even read. The way to prosperity in this nation is education. That's the front door. And then you've got to have access to capital. Booker T. Washington, go get a trade, start a business, and be able to compete on a level playing field. Be able to get a small business loan or a micro loan, whatever it is. There's got to be access to capital. We already got rid of redlining. Those are the things that we need to make sure are available to everyone, irrespective of race or ethnicity.
But it's not happening, and the reason that's not happening is the people who are running our country today, the people who are making the decisions, hate our country. That's the bottom line. Of course, you and I could put a plan on paper to show what should be done to, maybe not to cure, but to help these problems. All right? A lot of these problems will take generations to cure. But we could see what to do right. But everything that's being done now is intentionally wrong. Letting people out of prison, having no bail, the transgenders. It's all to destroy the fabric of the United States of America. We have to recognize that the people who are in charge are our enemy. They are traitors to America.
There's no doubt about it. And just throw in the open borders while you're at it. The Obama administration, his Civil Rights Commission, oddly, Richard Kirstenau said, illegal immigration disproportionately hurts Black workers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we are seeing an invasion right now under our, it's amazing that we're not locking people up for treason. This is the best example of not upholding the oath of office. We are being invaded as we speak.
It's an invasion.
And they won't even go and see it. It's just unbelievable.
And here we are, Biden talking about the sanctity of the Ukrainian border and how we have to help them protect their border, and we're not protecting our own border. Why is that? It's
nonsensical.
America.
It's nonsensical, and I see it at the very least irresponsible and incompetent, but at the worst, it's treason.
It's treason. We're hearing a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, and cries that America is racist at its core, per the 1619 Project, which claims that slavery was an essential part of our country dating back to the American Revolution, and that racism is in our country's DNA. Mark, I can't understand how a racist country can vote a Black man, Barack Obama, as president twice. Can you? Does that make sense to you?
Obviously not. And on its face, it is a lie on its face. But the reality is that there are racists that live in America, but America is obviously not racist. You can go back and just listen to Frederick Douglass and listen to folks who spoke so eloquently about the greatness of this country. You can look at the inflow of Africans into this country. There are certain things that make it so clear that America is the last best hope for the world for a reason. For a reason. Now, I understand the claims of systemic racism. I understand them. I don't agree with them. But here's why I understand them. The Democrat Party doesn't have good ideas. And so they have to speak to us as groups. They have to divide us along ethnicity, along sexual identity, along all these things in order for their party to have any relevance at all. See, some people, instead of looking at their own ability to succeed, instead of looking at their own intellect and the work of their hands, none of which have anything to do with their ethnicity, they want them to think that they can only make it if we focus on the color of their skin. America is long past that chapter.
Long past that chapter. And unfortunately, the people who are relying on those kinds of policies unfortunately, are sitting along the side of the highway, and other people who come into this country, 5 in a car and 6 on a bed, will be the ones who succeed in this country because it remains the land of the free and the home of the brave. If it weren't a good country or a great opportunity, then why are millions of people risking their lives to come here? And they're people of color. They're not all white guys from Azerbaijan or wherever, right? They're people of all colors and all faiths dying, risking their lives to get in here. And it's a bad country, but that is what's being taught to our children. That is what.
But here's the bad part about it. See, race has become an idol in the culture. So that's the first problem. Race, it's a problem of idolatry. Ethnicity, I don't like to call it race because we're all one blood, the Bible tells us. But ethnicity has become an idol, just as climate change is an idol, and just as gender orientation is an idol. That's the stool. Those are the 3 things that the Democrat Party stands on. 3 idols. And as long as we allow them to divide us that way, half the country, I think is far less than half the country, because flyover country is really still center right. Mm-hmm. And so the 2 coasts will continue to divide us politically. But here's what I know. I saw a man in 2016 and in 2020 get more of the black vote than any Republican president or candidate for president ever in history. Mm-hmm. And so there are things that people are waking up because we have to live this experience. We have to live through the division that's being created by the Democrat Party. We have to live it. The homelessness population in California, just look at that. Veterans and disproportionate black people on the streets in California. And what do? When there's an election, they go and clean it up. As soon as the election passes, they're back on the street. These people don't care about people. They care about power. They care about being able to exploit the system. Just look at Joe Biden and all his corruption. That's what the Democrat Party today stands for. It's not John F. Kennedy's Democrat Party anymore.
He'd be a Republican today. If he was alive, he'd be a Republican today.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt about it. Could you imagine if John F. Kennedy, RFK, Robert Kennedy Jr., and Donald Trump were on the same ticket with Trump on the top, of course? Wouldn't that be interesting? Wonderful. We'll talk about that later. But I'm telling you, we have gotten away from our values because half of what they're promoting with this ethnic division with DE&I, which is simply another boondoggle, like climate change. They've created another boondoggle. To fund their programs that are simply putting poison into the minds of the people who are listening to it. It's poison to believe diversity. There's nothing wrong with diversity, but it needs to happen organically in your community. You can't force diversity. Diversity happens out of the atmosphere, out of the soil, out of the land that you're in. That's how diversity happens. You don't force people to be together. Mm-hmm. People will come together like you and me, Dr. Bob. Mm-hmm. We can sit down and talk all day because we share values. I was at an event and I was the only black person at the table. And there might have been another 5 in the event of 300 people. 5 black people out of maybe 300 white people. And a woman leaned over the table and she said to me, Pastor, she said, tell me, how do you feel? Being at this table and in a room with mostly white people. And I didn't miss a beat. I said, ma'am, I choose my community based on my values.
We share values at that table. Right.
Based on, I don't choose friends based on the color of their skin.
Yeah. Let's talk about your book. The title is Prodigal Republican, and you published it in 2012. Just over 10 years ago. But I think that the messages there are more important now than they were back then. In it, you urge readers to return to core values that have been instrumental in making our country so great, urging people to be self-reliant and not dependent on the government, to have a good work ethic, to promote the sanctity of human life, and to preserve the traditional marriages. And perhaps most important, you urge people to become actively engaged in the political process in order to elect leaders who believe in God and in the Judeo-Christian values, all for the betterment of our communities. Tell us more about how you came to those conclusions 10 years ago. Fantastic.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. I tell you, somewhere around 1993, 1994, in my last semester of law school, I clerked for a federal judge. His name was Robert Takasugi, a great man. But he and his family had been in the Japanese internment camps. And at that time, Dr. Bob, I really didn't have a label for my values. I was raised by a single mother, even though my father, as you said earlier, was a very famous athlete at the time. I was raised by a single mother. And I just, in the black community, you think Democrat is on your birth certificate. Mm-hmm. In fact, the first vote I cast when I was of age was for Bill Clinton, because that's what black people did. We voted for the Democrat. You don't think.
We're going to get into that a little later. You're absolutely right. Okay.
All right. I won't get too far down the road. But so when I wrote the book, it was in response to what I experienced clerking for the federal judge. because I would give motion recommendations and I would simply follow the law logically. And one day they started laughing in the motion hearing. And I said, what are you laughing about? They said, you don't realize it, but you're a conservative. And I didn't know what that meant, Dr. Bob, I'm sorry to say. And I began a journey of understanding the difference between liberalism and conservatism in their classical definitions. And my wife and I, who got married in 1994, right along with that clerkship experience, we began to understand what we believed and why. And that's what's reflected in that book. And so I want Black people to understand, and anybody else who's interested, Black people used to be all Republicans coming out of slavery, emancipation, the Reconstruction. Right. And what led us away from the Republican Party? I wanted them to understand that, because today they believe that being a Republican is a dirty word. They don't understand the 3/5 clause. They don't understand why we fought to have the 3/5 clause, because we were fighting against the abolitionists in the South. They believe that the Constitution is a racist document. There's so many lies out there that I did that book because I wanted people to understand, one, how could a Black man be conservative and Republican, number one. Number two, what does republicanism and being a Democrat have to do? What are the intersections with the Black community and culture? And finally, and here's the crux of your question. Here's what I want people to understand. Whether you deal with Moses and his father-in-law Jethro, or you deal with Jesus coming down from the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. In both of those instances, we are supposed to influence culture by electing godly leaders over us, and by being, in the New Testament, salt and light. Those two things mean, in their essence, influencing culture. You can't separate politics from faith, plain and simple. And we've been lied to with the Johnson Amendment. We've been lied to in terms of how the church is supposed to engage. And people have been given an excuse to sit down on their faith. No, when you go to the ballot box, your faith has to come with you. Your values must come with you.
Now, the book urges people to get involved in the political process. And I know in particular, you're concerned with getting pastors involved in the political process. But in my experience, religious leaders rarely take public positions on political issues, even issues that are directly related to their beliefs. And I'll give you an example. I backed a lawsuit a couple years ago against Newsom, California's governor, when during COVID, he issued an executive order that prohibited prayer in houses of worship, despite the fact that the U.S. Constitution makes it clear that we all have the right to practice our religion without any interference from the government. Now, you would think, or I would think, that religious leaders would be up in arms and sign up as plaintiffs for that lawsuit. But as hard as we tried, my lawyer, Chuck Lamondre, and I were only able to find one man, Bishop Art Hodges of the South Bay United Pentecostal Church in Chula Vista, who was brave enough to become the sole plaintiff in our case, which, by the way, we won. The court ruled that governors cannot place more severe restrictions on religious institutions than are placed on retail establishments. Basically, if you can go to a crowded Costco to buy stuff, then you can go to church and pray. Why religious leaders fail to speak out is a puzzle to me. Perhaps because they're concerned about fracturing their congregations. But one of your goals, I know, is to inspire pastors to become civically engaged. So tell me what you teach them. Are you teaching them to speak from the pulpit about these issues, to not be afraid? Maybe if 10% of the congregation doesn't believe that, then it's still okay. They should be preaching their values.
Dr. Bob, I can do a whole show on this topic with you. So I'll try to keep it brief. First of all, thank you for what you did. Bishop Art Hodges, I'm in association with him, and Pastor Cheon from H-Rock, Harvest Rock Church, was also a part of those lawsuits. And by the way, those lawsuits impacted and helped the entire country because, as you know, it went to the Supreme Court. Right. And so thank you for the role that you played in that, which was a very instrumental role. When it came to COVID and what Governor Newsom and so many other governors did to the church, here's what happened. They tested what they were afraid of as government leaders. They tested the church. And by and large, the church failed.
Church caved. Right. Caved.
Yeah. You can drive by the strip club. You can drive by Walmart.
No, you could not only drive, you can go into marijuana dispensaries. Okay? They were viewed as special and critical or whatever, but you couldn't sing in church.
They called it essential businesses.
Essential, right.
And inherently, they were telling us as a government that churches are non-essential. That's what they did.
Abortion clinics were open. Liquor stores were open. Marijuana dispensaries were open. They are viewed as essential. But being able to pray, no.
And so to your point, our religious leaders who I speak to all the time, they are bound by another lie. I talked about the Johnson Amendment, but they're bound by another lie, which is called separation of church and state, which doesn't exist in the Constitution. It's a construct. And they get confused with what Thomas Jefferson meant in his letter to the church in Danbury, Connecticut. He didn't mean that the church wasn't supposed to be involved in government. He meant that the government was not supposed to be involved in the church.
Exactly.
The very thing that they allowed the government to do. And so, I've been running churches for a long time. And I've always made it my business to try to tell the church what was happening up in Sacramento. But our leaders don't want to hear about it. And there's a lot of reasons for it. But the primary challenge is once you take up that mantle like Jack Hibbs does, or like Bishop Art Hodges does, or Cheon does, or Rob McCoy does, you're in a fight against one of the biggest, we call it spheres of influence in the church world, one of the biggest spheres of influence in culture, and that's government. Mm-hmm. Although God instituted government, it has been infiltrated by Satan. Mm-hmm. And these pastors, unfortunately, don't understand their charge. Preaching the Torah or the Bible, preaching the word on Sunday is just part of their challenge. That's just part of it. Because if the culture around the church is falling apart and burning, how relevant are you? How relevant are you? And so I talk to them about what the Constitution says. The First Amendment, free speech and freedom of religious expression.
That's it.
But the Second Amendment is in place to protect the First Amendment.
You got it. You got it.
And so I try to tell them that they've got to lead in boldness, because the number says to us, God doesn't like us as believers to be lukewarm. He'd rather us be hot or cold.
We have to be doers. Doers. Believing isn't enough. Believing isn't enough. You have to act on your beliefs.
You do. The book of James says you got to not just be hearers of the word, you have to be doers of the word. Right. And that's a challenge. So here's the other problem, Dr. Bob. So many people get their cues from their faith leaders, less now than before, but still, we get a lot of our cues from faith leaders. And if the faith leaders don't say, this is a problem, we go about our day-to-day activities not understanding that we have to come against some of the things that are happening, especially through our children in schools, showing pornographic books and drag queen shows And we're not hearing religious leaders in mass saying, let's meet and stand against this at the next school board meeting.
Right.
Let's demand we know what are in these books. We're not seeing that. We are seeing it from mothers. But I dare you to tell me how many religious leaders you know who have led a protest at school board meetings about what's happening in our school districts all across this country.
And it should be them. It should be them. Yeah. They're the keepers of what's right, supposedly, of God's word. It should be them who lead the opposition. Next, let's talk about an always hot topic in our country, abortion versus the right to life. But before we dive into that, I'd like you to tell me, Marc, about the No Longer Bound ministry and your involvement in it.
Thank you so much. No Longer Bound Abortion and Miscarriage Recovery Ministry. It's a ministry that my wife founded in 2010. And she founded it out of her own pain of having had an abortion. And so the ministry ministers to men and women across all ethnicity and across all faith denominations who are carrying the shame and guilt of having either made a decision to abort their child, or they're carrying the pain of having had a miscarriage. And I have to tell you, we've been able to minister to people from as young as 18 all the way to the age of 82 years old. It has been a blessing to see people be ministered to by the living scriptures and leave from our 15-week Bible study or from our weekend intensive healing retreat, leave feeling whole and refreshed and renewed, and they become ambassadors to talk to people about the sanctity of human life and about making choices for what is life in the womb of the intended mother. And so it has been a real blessing. And so, but I want to add to that, that I believe that it's important to value life in the womb and outside of the womb. You know, people, conservatives and Republicans always get labeled with, we only care about life in the womb. It's just, that's a lie. Dr. Bob, I was fortunate enough to have done the largest free medical clinic in LA County many years ago when the church that I ran owned the Forum in Inglewood. We did the largest free medical clinic, and I can go on and on and on. So I want to dispel the idea and come against the lie, the narrative that we only care about life in the womb. We care about both. They don't care about life in the womb. That's clear. And they're making a business off of it. They're making a business off of selling body parts of little infants, and it is demonic. And so No Longer Bound gives me a platform to minister to men and women who are hurting from having had a reproductive loss in the womb.
Good for you and for your wife. Thank God. Next, continuing the same theme, but the recent Supreme Court decision on abortion. In the case of Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization, which took place in November last year, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, a pro-abortion ruling. Roe versus Wade was a pro-abortion ruling that the court had made in 1973. That ruling guaranteed a constitutional right to abortion. In this historic and far-reaching decision, the Supreme Court officially reversed Roe versus Wade, declaring that the constitutional right to abortion that has been upheld for nearly half a century no longer exists. Now, most people mischaracterize this recent ruling, saying that it outlawed abortion. But as you know, that's not at all what the ruling did. In simple terms, the ruling says that there is nothing in the U.S. Constitution that guarantees a person the right to have an abortion. And the Constitution is very clear that any right not explicitly granted to the federal government in the Constitution is a matter for each state to decide. So some states will allow abortions and some states won't. How do you think this is all going to work out, Marc?
I tell you, that is still something that I celebrate. Many of us didn't think we'd see it in our lifetime, but thanks to President Trump, we got the justices on the Supreme Court that understood that the Constitution is clear with respect to issues like abortion. If it's not in the Constitution as a federal matter under the 10th Amendment, it is left to the states. And so we're seeing a 50-state strategy now where, like California and North Carolina and so many other states, they want to be sanctuary states for abortion. And that is what federalism is all about.
Right.
If you don't want to live in a state that really wants to make murdering babies in the womb its epicenter and its a biggest attraction for why to live there, you have the freedom to move from that state. Now, I obviously hope that doesn't happen, and that states like California find a way to have a more sober-minded legislature. But California has passed a semi-infanticide bill. Mm-hmm. So I don't see them turning in the other direction anytime soon. But there'll be a strategy all across this nation where states will decide based on their legislatures. And so for folks who are sitting at home and watching this, there's a role for all of us to play. You've got to elect legislators that reflect your values. And if you don't, you're going to have the darkness of unfettered abortion and maybe even infanticide, like California is doing after a child has already been born. And so that's where this is going. Of course, Congress is now dipping its toe in the water. The left, the radical left, wants to codify what Roe v. Wade was. And then the conservative right, the Freedom Caucus and others, they want to put a 13-week ban on abortion that would be federal. I'm torn because I understand providing a prophylactic and responding to what a radical leftist will try to do on a national basis. But either it's left to the states or it's not.
That's right. The federal government, it's either left to the state or not. The federal government, and according to this ruling, which I think is accurate, has no say. There's no say. That's all. No say. Yeah.
I think Congress has a problem with trying to do what the Supreme Court said is not their purview.
That's exactly right. Let's talk about the Black community and why, for more than 70 years, it has voted overwhelmingly for Democrats. Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States, is credited with ending slavery in the United States. Lincoln was a Republican. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, announcing, quote, that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious areas are and henceforth shall be free. And a couple of years later, under Lincoln's leadership, Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which abolished slavery in the entire United States. Abolishing slavery was a very contentious issue at that time, but it was supported by President Lincoln and by the Republicans in the House and in the Senate. But it was opposed by the Democrats in the House. It only became law in 1865 because the Republicans won 50 more seats in the House in the 1864 election, and they all voted for the amendment, and it passed. And for many years afterwards, Black Americans supported the Republican Party. But the share of Black adults who affiliated with the GOP started to decline in the 1940s. By my reading, today, only about 1 in 10 Black adults identify with or lean toward the Republican Party. 1 in 10. And today, in our largest cities, where crime and poverty are soaring, Blacks continue to vote for Democratic mayors. It doesn't make sense to me, and it didn't make sense to President Trump. In September of 2016, before he was president, while he was running for president, Donald Trump addressed a gathering of Black pastors in Cleveland and said, "Vote for me. What have you got to lose?" So my question to you, Mark, is why aren't more Blacks voting for Republicans? They have nothing to lose by doing so.
First, I'll give you the simple answer. blacks are voting party and not values.
Wow.
Blacks are overwhelmingly considered or self-identify as conservative. In fact, 20, what's the statistic? 25% self-identify as conservative. Yet only a small portion of blacks
vote that way.
13% voted for Trump in the last go around. So you can call it from 10 to 13% actually vote their values, while 25 to 26% say they're conservative. So that's the first answer, which is they vote party over values. That's number one. Number two, you've got to go back to the Great Compromise of 1877. That's when the slide away from the Republican Party began. And I chronicle that in my book, The Prodigal Republican Facing Politics. In 1877, the Great Compromise, there was a tie. They couldn't decide based on the Electoral College who was going to be president. There was a tie. And they had a great compromise. The Republicans took the White House, and in exchange for taking the White House, the Republicans agreed to take the federal troops out of certain areas. That led to black codes. That led to Jim Crow, ultimately. Also, as a third point, and you can follow I won't go through the steps, but the steps from the Great Compromise all the way up to the Civil Rights Act. After that, blacks were pretty much 95% or more voting for Democrats. There was a slide, top-down policies for the most part. The New Deal, welfare, TANF, aid for women with children, et cetera, Section 8, all of those things. They pandered and they made sure that blacks knew that the Democrats were going to take care of them, not understanding that was just another form of slavery.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
Yeah, a different plantation.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, if people, I can talk about black people, but if people just voted what was in their best interest, there's no way anyone could tell me that getting a check from the government and staying at home every day, not having to go to work, is good for them. And that's where we are. We're paying more. We're paying people to stay at home. And so Biden wants to brag about the unemployment rate, but he doesn't talk about the workforce participation rate. We are killing a generation. And so we've got a real challenge when blacks don't understand personal responsibility. We have this saying, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, right? And there's certainly that's valid as long as you got boots. Let's make sure we all have boots. And then you've got to apply personal responsibility. If you can't get into Harvard, go to the local community college. There's no right to get into Ivy League school. We've got this entitlement complex where we're entitled to certain things. And when we don't get it, we go form task forces and try to ram stuff down the taxpayers' throats like reparations. Want a handout, want a check. A handout has never helped anybody. You can give somebody a fish and let them eat, or you can teach them how to fish so that they can eat a lifetime. That's what we have to be doing. And that's what we're missing, because we've got leaders who are race hustlers. They're pimps of the social fabric.
Very disappointing. Now, the new organization that you'd recently founded just earlier this year, Build the Vote, based on its name, I can sort of guess its mission, but I'd like you to give us more details. You don't have a website. I searched for it. I couldn't find the website yet.
Oh, no, I've got a website, Dr. Bob. I'll make sure you get it. It's .org. There's one that's .com, and that's the problem.
Okay, I found the .com. That's the problem.
BuildTheVote.org.
Okay.
And so BuildTheVote.org came out of the work we were doing for Cure America Action, which is more political. And I was doing a lot of education under Cure America Action. There's 4 pillars. We talk about educational freedom, which is the true civil rights issue of our time, educational freedom. I'm working on a major initiative here in the state of California for next year on that issue. And we've got to have educational freedom in the form of vouchers, in the form of all the other opportunities that parents should have to take their feet and walk their students to schools that are succeeding, whether they be parochial schools or private schools or charter schools. Mm-hmm. We've got to have educational freedom. I talk about the founding principles of our nation. I come against the 1619 Project, and I bring in qualified teachers to do this with me, scholars all across the country. We talk about critical race theory and the Marxist agenda against the family, really important issues. And then we talk about the free enterprise. It is the most compatible economic system. It has lifted the most people out of poverty, out of any other economic system that ever existed. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to teach these principles. And by the way, when I go into these communities now with Build the Vote, and we're obviously registering people to make sure that not only are they registered, because by the way, Dr. Bob, there are millions of people of faith who are just not registered and they're not engaged. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Period. Plain and simple.
Yeah, we have to go out and register them. And, the Democrats have been doing that. They'll find anybody and register them. They'll help them fill out the ballot. We're not doing that. Now, talking about the ballot, the next election for president, the very important one, is going to be on November 5th, 2024. Who do you think will be the nominee for both the Republican and Democrat Party?
I'll go out on a limb. I think it's going to be Gavin Newsom for the Democrats. Mm-hmm. I think that the Democrats cannot afford to have a Biden as the top of the ticket, given his very obvious cognitive decline. Mm-hmm. With a Kamala Harris who couldn't even get her own state when she was running as a candidate. We can't have her as president. I think the Democrats know that. Gavin Newsom is clearly being primed to be their candidate. So I think that's obvious. And he's a serpent, just like Barack Obama was. He has a seductive spirit, and I think that's their best shot. Mm-hmm. On the Republican side, I really do believe they've been trying to kill Donald Trump off, figuratively speaking, for 6 years.
That's right. And
they haven't succeeded. They're trying to kill him off in the legal system, and I don't think it's going to succeed. So I think Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. Mm-hmm. And who he chooses as his vice president will, I think that'll be the nail biter. Mm-hmm. I hope he's wise in that. And I think at the end of the day, when you look at the policies that he put in place, and you look at how he moved the black vote, and you look at the proposal of the Platinum Plan, which was $500 million toward black businesses and a variety of other things. And he moved the black vote more than anybody else because he went out and said, what else do you have to lose?
Yeah, what do you have to lose?
And black men are, in particular, are the ones who are waking up. I think when you look at it in those terms, I think that's how it will shake out. Now, I will say for the record, I like, if we're talking in golf terms, I liked where the ball landed when President Trump was swinging the ball. I didn't necessarily always like the way he swung the golf club.
We agree. Yeah, most people are so influenced by liking or not liking the mannerism. You're not marrying the guy. What matters is where the ball lands, as you said. Now, I'm going to agree with you.
Just one last point. There's nobody right now in the Republican field of candidates for president that can protect us from the convergence of China and Russia, mm-hmm. that can protect us from this cashless system that they're trying to move us toward, and that can protect us from this ESG nonsense that is happening. All of those things are in place through the WEF, the World Economic Forum, to destroy America. I don't know of a candidate right now, and maybe one will emerge, but I don't know of one who has the moxie to stand against that kind of evil.
Other than Donald Trump is what you mean. Right.
Correct.
Right. Now, I certainly agree with you that Joe Biden is not going to be the candidate. He is a stand-in. He's a placeholder. It will be somebody, I'm going to propose something different than Gavin Newsom, because I think Gavin Newsom, you could rip him apart. You look at California, it wouldn't be too hard. But he does have, he's a good speaker and he's attractive. But I think the guaranteed winner for the Democrats would be Michelle Obama. The guaranteed winner. She's the most respected woman in America for some reason. I don't know why, but that's the data. She has people say, but she has no history, no credibility. She doesn't need history. As a matter of fact, having no history is an asset because nobody can point to problems in that history. So she has a clean slate, sort of just like Barack Obama had a clean slate. Never voted anything controversial, right? And God forbid you found something to criticize about Michelle Obama, you'd be a racist. You'd be a racist. Or during a debate, he was too tough on her, right? So I think it's going to be Michelle Obama because the Republicans can't win against a Michelle Obama. Now, a lot of people say, that she doesn't want it because she has a lifestyle. Well, Donald Trump had a lifestyle too. That's meaningless. Meaningless. Right. These people who have a lot of money, more money doesn't matter. What matters is power.
That's right.
And from what I've read of her background, she is more of a politician than her husband. And I can see her on stage saying, we've had enough of politicians. We need a woman who can think with her head and make decisions with her heart. I can see it. And I think it'll happen late. It'll happen in maybe even Q1 or Q2 of next year. It can be late. You know why? She won't have to raise money. She won't have to raise money for two reasons. First of all, the money will be there if she needed it. Second reason, she won't have to campaign. She'll go on Oprah twice. Everybody knows who she is. She won't have to campaign. So that's my fear. And the way I think it's going to happen, Q1 or Q2 of next year, President Biden will hold a press conference, very somber. He'll talk about the fact that he's just run a series of battery of medical tests, and his doctors have told him that he can't do it. For the benefit of his family and himself, he shouldn't do it. He can't, and he's going to say, I was committed to doing it. I know what I can do to save this country, but I got to listen to my doctors. But I have a great candidate, somebody who I'm supporting wholeheartedly. And here she is, Michelle Obama, and he'll fade into the background, and that's the story. And if she wins, Mark, it'll be another 2 terms of Barack Obama or Barack Obama's policies. It'll be the end of America as we know it.
Well, Dr. Bob, as you know, her first time speaking on the public stage, on the national stage, it was clear that she hates America. The very place that has given her now hundreds of millions of dollars of wealth, the very nation that has benefited her and her family, she hates. That's clear to me, number one. Number two, it's going to be interesting. That would be the only person that could get away with being nominated by the party in the face of Kamala Harris, who would be the obvious heir apparent. She'd be the only person that they could do that with and get away with it. But it'll be interesting. It'll be a real political theater, I'll tell you that much.
Yep, I'm very worried. Sorry to end on a somewhat of a negative note, but I want to talk about positives. And Mark's life is about positives. The positive of recognizing challenges and working hard to overcome them. His story shows that in America, you can succeed if you stand on conservative principles, if you work hard and persevere, and maintain a positive attitude. Mark sets a great example for people of all races about the power of hard work and positive thinking. There is a saying in Hebrew, Avodah kesha yotzeret nisim. Work hard creates miracles. Mark's life is living proof of that saying. Marc, I want to thank you for spending time with me today, and thank you so much more for speaking out and for carrying out your mission to convince Americans to return to the conservative Judeo-Christian principles that have made our country great.
Dr. Bob, thank you so much. And I invite all of your listeners to join the army that you and I are a part of on the front lines. America needs every hand on deck so that we can have something to pass on to the next generation. God bless you, Dr. Bob, and shalom to you and to your viewers.
Thank you, Marc, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, please subscribe and you'll be automatically notified of future podcasts in this series.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. If you enjoyed these interviews with some of today's most influential thought leaders, please follow and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, you can also watch each episode on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate reading your comments on YouTube and social media, and now you can submit your questions on my website as well. Head over to lifelessonswithdrbob.com and click the question tab at the top of the page or the one on the right side of the screen, and let us know what's on your mind. I'll answer your questions at the beginning of each episode, so let it rip. Let's have some fun.